Hey class, welcome to Chapter 5, Section 2, Conflict over New British Policies. Following the 7 Years' War, Britain began to change the way that it treated the colonists. There's a number of reasons why Britain changed the way they were treating the colonists. First of all, Great Britain's amount of territory and empire was vast. Check out this map here. All of the pink area is part of the British Empire. It was immense. And because it was so large, Britain had to tighten its control in order to govern it. If it was small, they could be looser, but it was so vast, they really want to tighten their control. Another reason why they're in tightened control is that British government officials are pretty upset with the colonists' effort during the war. It was pretty half-hearted. They didn't really fight that hard, didn't care that hard, and Great Britain was upset about that. A fourth thing that changed, or why it changed, was colonial merchants were trading with Britain's enemies. During the French and Indian War, the colonists were trading with Britain's enemies. They saw that as a treasonous act. And then fourthly, a lot of members of British Parliament felt as though the colonists had too much freedom, too much independence, and they wanted to tighten the rein. And as they tighten their rein over the colonists are not going to be happy. There are a number of ways to tighten their control over the colonists. The first is the Proclamation of 1763. And the Proclamation of 1763 forbid the colonists from settling west of the Appalachian Mountains. You can see this line here going right along the Appalachian Mountains. Colonists were not allowed to move west of that line. There were a couple of reasons for doing that. One, it would prevent unrest with the Indians. The more the colonists moved west, the more conflict they'd have with the Indians, and the British would need to come and settle that. And that costs, of course, the king a lot of money. It would also help keep trappers and traders out of the area. Well, the colonists didn't like this. The colonists saw this as the British trying to limit their expansion, the British trying to keep tabs on them, and they didn't care for that. So the first way the British are going to respond and tighten control is with the Proclamation of 17. Another way is the Quartering Act. When the war ends, Britain's going to leave some 10,000 troops in the colonies to protect the colonists and protect their property. The military was there to enforce laws and also protect them against Indian uprisings. But the colonists viewed this as a violation of their rights. This act ordered colonists to house troops and provide them with some basic necessities like firewood, salt, and drink. The colonists hated having the British living in their home. So there was the Proclamation of 1763, the Quartering Act, and then also there were a series of navigation and trade acts. These acts regulated trade between the colonies and Britain's foreign competition. This policy is known as mercantilism. It forced the colonies to purchase products made in the British Empire and to make and grow products to be purchased by the British. You can see here on this map up here, the colonists would buy manufactured goods that were made in Great Britain, and then they would provide different grains, livestock to different parts of the British Empire. But Britain wanted to keep all of their goods within the British Empire. And so for many years, the colonists chose to trade with British enemies and smuggle their goods in. But after the war, Britain said, no way. You may only trade with us, and you may not smuggle in goods from our enemies. And this, of course, these restrictions are going to really upset the colonists. A fourth thing that the British did is they passed what's called writs of assistance. A writ of assistance allowed a British official to search any home for smuggled goods, and they did not need a search warrant in order to go into your house. This, of course, infuriated the colonists. For any reason, the British could go into your home. This man here, James Otis, he argued vehemently against this power that the British had. But nonetheless, the British continued to use this power, and they would barge into your home without any kind of a search warrant. The British did. There's a bunch of them, folks. A bunch of new policies that are really angering the colonists. This was called the Sugar Act. Now, the colonists have been paying taxes for a long time, but these taxes were beginning to change. These were taxes that are going directly to the British Parliament, purely for revenue, purely for making money. The taxes, the British said, were placed on the colonists to help provide for their protection. But really, the colonists saw it as a way for them to make money, and they taxed a lot of everyday goods. Besides sugar, of course, it also taxed things like molasses, coffee, silk, and indigo. A wide variety of taxes placed on them. And this, of course, really angered the colonists. Tax was called a Stamp Act, and the Stamp Act required colonial businesses to purchase special stamps to place on items that were taxed. Legal documents, marriage certificates, newspapers, calendars, playing cards. All of those items now had a stamp that had to go on it. This picture in the top left-hand corner was a type of stamp that would be pressed onto a Word document or some kind of a paper document. You see the protesting going on. In this picture right here, the colonists are actually burning things that require a stamp. And then down here we have a man kind of hanging in effigy as they protest this act and this tax. One more thing the British are doing that is outraging the colonists. Now, they've been paying taxes, like I said, but the big overarching issue for the colonists is this concept of no taxation without representation. They're saying you can't tax us because we have no representative. If we had a representative in British Parliament, then it'd be okay for you to tax us. But we have no voice, no say whatsoever. Therefore, there should be no taxation without representation. This phrase coined again by James Otis. And it becomes a rallying cry for the colonists everywhere. So a number of British atrocities. Well, after a while, the colonists began to respond back a little bit. One group in particular was created, called the Sons of Liberty, created by this man over here, Samuel Adams. Excuse me. And he's going to organize this group to protest all of these atrocities. And they were willing to resort to violence and intimidation. They would even tar and feather British officials or different colonists who may have followed the rules. They were brutal in their treatment, but they were adamant about protesting all of these taxes and all of these British actions. One of the most by the colonists was the Stamp Act Congress. They actually, every colony gathered together in New York City in this building right here, the Federal Building, and they are going to gather together to protest the Stamp Act. This is a big deal because we have for the first time the colonists coming together as one. Very significant. And the group is going to come together and send a petition to King George III saying, King, we are loyal to you, we want to follow you. However, these taxes are unfair. And believe it or not, the king is actually going to repeal or take back this tax. And you see in this cartoon on the bottom right, it is British officials mourning the death of the Stamp Act. This man right here actually has a coffin that is entitled the Stamp Act as it gets killed. However, this was a short-lived success for the colonists because in return, the king is going to begin to pass even stricter rules against the colonists. So again, recap. Great Britain, because their empire is so vast, because they're unhappy with the colonists' lack of effort, is going to tighten their control over the colonists. They're going to pass the Navigation Acts, the Sugar Act, the Proclamation of 1763, writs of assistance, Stamp Act, Quartering Act, and all of this under the guise of no taxation without representation that infuriates the colonists. They will protest it with the Sons of Liberty and their violent activities, and also by having the Stamp Act Congress. But the breach has widened, and the colonists are working toward their way toward eventual independence from Great Britain.